Broom Peddler. Matha received all kinds of advice as he prepared to leave Tara for home. Honour is all you have in the end, Fionn advised him more than once. Your courage and your family, said Conan. If you tend those, the rest will take care of itself. Knowledge is the most important power, said King Cormac. He noticed that none of the advice had anything to do with what he wanted to know. Now that his relief at finding the bowl was fading, he realised that he had never asked the bad-mannered crane how he was supposed to get the thing to do anything for him. After all, the little bit of burnt clay had sat for countless years in the woodcutter's cabin, without doing anything at all for anyone, not to speak of gathering life from 7 corners of the country. Nor had it done anything at all since he had tucked it in his tunic. If he went home and presented it as some kind of cure, he would rightly be regarded as a light-headed fool. Before leaving, he tried Droleen, assuming that the most powerful druid who had ever lived would tell him what word or method would make the bowl useful. But the old man just turned back into a wren and flew off chirping crankily. Is there any favour you would like us to do for your son? Asked the king, seeing him heading for the gates. There is one, said Matha bravely. It had been on his mind for a while. Name it, said Cormac majestically. Is it a cow from the royal herd you want? You can have 2. Is it a stone mason to cleave granite for a corn mill? Have my best man for a month and welcome. No, sir, not that. Speak up, man, said Micheál. I remember, good king, said Matha, that you said all the knowledge in the world is contained on a piece of calf hide you carry around with you. I would owe you my life if you would just look in there and tell me what it says about my bowl. A bowl? The boy troubles me about a bowl, said Cormac, suddenly red-faced. He shouted to a herdsman, The boy says he wants a sheep. Give him 10 fine mountain ewes. Matha could not fathom it. Cormac walked away busily talking about how the linen makers were pleased with how the flax was growing this year. The soreness Matha felt was made worse by the fact that he was sure he saw Conan and Droleen suppressing a laugh. He assumed it was his plight that amused them, though they were looking at Cormac. Matha left without the sheep. He hadn't the ground even for one. He walked on from that place with his unvoiced anger turning inwards in himself. If those people would not help him, he would travel the country until he found someone who would help. Days stretched into months, and the year passed, with Matha growing stronger and wiser. He found that he had a great head for gathering and retaining information of all sorts, and remembering all the things that he heard from the people who welcomed him into their homes. Unfortunately, none of the information took him any closer as to how he might use the bowl. One day, as he walked along what he thought was an old overgrown chariot way taking him west, he got into heavy ground. That was not uncommon in the middle of the country. He kept walking, knowing that carriageways were always laid on solid foundations of lime and broken rocks. But it seemed to be getting worse. The track seemed to be disappearing altogether into a marsh. Luckily, he had listened well to the accounts of other travellers. He suddenly remembered hearing a tale of a road that appeared once every 3 years. Any chariot following it was led to the middle of an underground lake. No person or beast who had carried along that track had ever been heard of again. Even those who had turned back to carry the tale had struggled to get away with it. Maybe such talk was nonsense made up to scare travellers, but Matha was finally learning to put caution before pride. He decided to turn back. As soon as he did, the marsh became aggressive. It started to follow him, and he began to run. The water was rising unnaturally, and the ground behind him was disappearing into black bog water almost faster than he could pull his feet out of the mud. In no time, he was exhausted from running, and every step was getting harder. He was up to his waist, and the water kept rising. Desperately, he threw himself to the side and caught onto the branches of a willow. It was bendy, but strong, and the tough little tree pulled him up into herself. He climbed a bit further and sat. The water lapped resentfully around the base of the willow for some time. Matha waited many hours before it eased and began to recede back around the turn in the road, to again lie in wait for an unsuspecting entourage. He sat for a little while longer in the company of the unloved willow. He was rubbing the little bowl and thinking about it when he heard something. It sounded like a human noise, and it wasn't from the bowl. It came from further back along the road. At first, he thought it was another wanderer about to tread into the trap. He climbed down quickly to warn the fellow traveller. He couldn't see anyone, but as he walked, he got closer to the talking. It was soft, affectionate talk, but in a language he didn't understand. By the time he realised the talk was coming from the blackthorn bushes next to him, the owner of the voice had also realised he had company. The banter stopped. Silence for a minute. Then a rustling, and the owner came forward. He was a plump man who would have been about of below average height, if it hadn't been for the great size of his grey head, which was at least as big as his substantial belly. Strange to relate, it was the first time in Matha's travels that he had looked in the eyes of someone coldly considering doing him immediate and great harm. The smell of his own death suddenly filled Martha's nostrils. He could not say afterwards what it was about that grey head that had made his heart stop, but at first he was not even able to speak. However he had sensed it, Matha's instincts were right. This was the most dangerous meeting yet of his young life. The creature he was facing was no ordinary mortal. He was known and feared the world over as Scorrum. However, Scorrum was not in Éireann that day on his own business, which would have been bad enough. He was there to do his wife's business, which was worse. Scorrum's beloved Carmen was a senior queen bondree from a land well to the north of Éireann. She had taught many colleagues their skills and concoctions. It had recently come to her ears that several of the women in Éireann who had been her eager students were no longer practicing their arts. Instead, they had been retired to remote parts of the country and barred from dabbling in magic of any sort. She became enraged and took to mumbling foul wishes on the person whom she blamed for this, one Fionn Micheál. Carmen did not see this the way a normal person would have, that she would actually have been thanking Micheál for the fact that those women were still waking up in the mornings, that Micheál had actually saved them from Cormac's more dramatic instructions. Bad magicians must be cut down by the sword or pierced with a red iron, Cormac would shout from his comfortable seat, while going hot in the face and plunging an imaginary iron through the air. Micheál preferred to think of himself as a soldier rather than as a cold-blooded punisher and butcher of people, even if they were not people to his liking. Besides, he had a more intimate understanding of the ways of the bondree than he could safely admit without raising suspicions of his own loyalties. He knew that the line between the bad and the good bondree wasn't always as clear as Cormac liked to imagine. Witchy misdeeds reported to Cormac could sometimes be exaggerated by people who were either scared or jealous, or by people who confused the cantankerous and bad-tempered for the wicked. Having been brought up by bad-tempered women with healing powers, Micheál was not so sure of the difference between a bad witch on a good day and a good witch on a bad day. Cormac did not understand this delicate balance of nature. It would not be true, though, to claim that Micheál's leniency in this matter was entirely born of goodwill to others. He had also given some consideration to his own health. He considered it a far better thing to receive the dubious blessings of a bad Bondree, whose life he had spared, than to be subjected to the dying curses of a Bondree, good or bad. The ill wishes of a powerful woman were likely to result in misfortunes cluttering the pathways of his life, lessening his chances of getting to old age in good condition. Rather than being pleased at these women still being alive, Carmen thought they'd be better off dead than the way they were now. She began to boil inside at the thought of 21 Bondrees idling in little cabins around the bogs and hills of Erin, far from people keeping a promise to do nobody any further harm. Days and weeks had gone by, with her getting increasingly angry. All that instruction wasted, she would scream at her lumpy, twisted half-goblin husband, Scurrum. He should have killed them, instead of having them lazing around, scratching their arses, growing flowers and looking at the stars, while that country carries on happily in peace and goodness. It's enough to make my flesh creep. I can't take it. I have to get them back to mischievous works. Yes, mistress, go and set them free. Ah, my lovely, a fine idea. And when they are free, they can lay 1,000 bitter spells on Micheál, each one cutting into him. They will injure him slowly to death. What pleasure! But here is a puzzle. I myself cannot go there, she added tetchily. You see, the high order of Bondrees depends on me, and would fall into disarray if I was away. She decided not to mention to her proud husband that the real reason she wouldn't go was that she was afraid she might not come back. Carmen had not survived this long through being reckless with her own life. The reason she had stopped tutoring witches in Erin was because she had taken a warning. She had fled her school on the very day she received the gift of a long whitethorn twig wrapped in crow's foot grasses. That was enough to make her suspect that Micheál might have skills beyond bludgeoning and slicing people. She guessed that he might have special personal protections, and worse, he might have knowledge that could harm her. How else could he have known that these items, which were ordinary enough ingredients for most women who made potions with herbs and insects, were like poison to her? We'll have to find him someone else to undertake this timely and satisfying work, she said. Well then, let me go, growled Scurrum. I'm ready for a mission. I want to bring ruin and misery to them. Oh, I don't know. Would you really do that for me? You are truly dashing. Carmen liked her husband well enough. He had already brought sickness, misfortune, fear and death to many, even though he was yet only 200 years old. She knew the mission would be even more dangerous for him than for her. He was prone to blundering anger and not sly enough to slip quickly out of dangerous situations. She knew there was a good chance that he would not come back. She didn't let that worry her unduly. She had lost things before. A few days later, a strange tramp appeared in a village in Ballyludach, in the northwest. He was wrapped in a great blanket and carried several hazel twigs on his shoulder in the manner of a broom maker. Carmen had advised him that the Bondrees in Erin were not renowned for their glamour and preferred a bit of hazel twig to a broom. Children didn't like the look of him, and some threw stones at him. Cats went missing in his wake. Adults remembered their manners and welcomed him into their homes. They fed him, let him warm himself. What was strange for these people, apart from the obvious matter of the head, was that the guest didn't have a good word to throw to a dog and never smiled. After devouring all the food at the house for his supper, he would settle silently by the fire for a few hours before blurting. "So I heard there's an old colliach of some kind living out in the bog behind that hill. Tell me where our house is there exactly, so I can avoid it." As soon as he had good directions to a Bondry's hut, he would leave the house without a word. The first Bondry he had approached, Vera, from the bog near Canal Ludach, was actually quite happy with her retirement. She had taken up collecting moths from the bog rushes. She was bewildered when Scurum revealed himself and gave her a hazel twig and some potions. "Get along out of this, boarhead," she said to him as politely as she could. Scurum unwrapped his tail and lashed her with it, speaking to her in Carmen's language, Carmen's voice. "Lazy Bondry, get back to work." This made Vera shiver with fright, in the way a harsh ex-teacher's voice always brings back fear. All Bondrys who had ever been through Carmen's schooling knew better than to cross her. Vera reluctantly agreed to put on her old cloak and to get back to looking for opportunities to bring bad luck to the people of Kennel Lugach. So went Scurum's mission. Some of the retired Bondrys were quite happy to get back to work. Others swore and spat at him. On the day that Matha heard him sitting beneath a bush singing love songs to his beloved far away, he was counting his little brooms and telling Carmen how much bad work he had done for her that day. Matha tried to quiet the terror he felt. He tried to silence the ancient instinct, the instinct of a deer at the sight of a hound, the voice that was yelling inside him to flee. He tried to tell himself that the grumpy, hog-like man that emerged from the bushes dusting himself off was probably no more than a disturbed priest, one of the Drolean's druids. Scurum did not attack or attempt to eat Matha straight away. Luckily for Matha, Scurum was not also completely used to all the types he might meet in these parts. At first he thought he might have found an accomplice. He made a crooked attempt at being friendly. "I can sense you're a young man of magic," said Scurum. "Could you show a poor traveller how he might get to the west?" Matha then realised that the fellow was no more a druid than he was himself. The look in his one working eye left Matha in no doubt that the stranger was merely trying to assess whether it would be less effort for him to recruit Matha or to kill him directly. Scurum assumed that anyone with magic would be on the same side as himself. He had never heard of magic being put to good use. By way of further efforts to befriend Matha, he said in a sneering accent, "Terrible the kinds of works our superiors expect us to do for them, is it not?" "Yes, indeed," said Matha, with a cough, trying to stop his voice from shaking. "Yeah, my lady had me out here, trawling the country, calling on snotty old hags, trying to sweet-talk them into going back to work. If she had trained them right in the first place, they'd need no encouragement. What do you think of that statement, young sir? Is it the truth I speak, or what?" This wasn't the first person Matha had met who had decided he had magical powers. One old woman recently pleaded with him to put her hands on her dying husband. Lacking the heart to tell her the truth, he had obliged. When the old man decided at that moment to sit up, the poor lady had gone on her knees, thanking Matha. There were men who asked him to find missing cows, and women who asked him to touch their infants with a sprig of hawthorn, as if he could add to the luck it would naturally bring. The explanation was simple enough, he thought. The sense of magic powers that people imagined they saw in him was actually emanating from the little piece of crockery wrapped in wool and kept inside his tunic. It made him ever more certain that the Heron had been right, and that the little bowl would solve all his problems. Just as soon as he divined how to use it. That was the only question that mattered. He certainly had no intention of revealing to the creature in front of him that he was only a defenceless young lad. While the ogre was still confused, Matha's fear turned to recklessness. He risked trying to trick more information out of Lumpy Head. "My own stupid mistress is worse than that, bad sis on her," he said, clearing his throat and trying to sound rough. "You know, I've been sent by her to look for a bowl that will attract scattered life. Though, of course, I'd rather be scattering the life than collecting it. I suppose you have seen such things in the place you come from?" The ogre was looking at him with a developing frown. Matha took in a deep breath as he prepared to take a wild guess. "You know the things you only have to spit on to get them working?" "The blood bowl?" "Oh, there is only one such bowl in the world," said Scurum slowly, and now clearly very suspicious. "And spit is not the fluid you rub on it. What kind of dumb fool of a wizard are you, anyway?" As the cloud of uncertainty about the working of the bowl disappeared, it was replaced by a cloud of danger gathering over Matha's head. Luckily, thoughts were slow-forming things with Scurum. The obvious facts about Matha had not yet solidified in his head when Matha said, "My friend, let me show you the way to the west." Though with every step he grew more suspicious, Scurum allowed Matha to escort him to the turn on the road. "It seems to be getting damp underfoot," said Scurum, turning. "Are you sure this is the right road?" Matha, of course, was gone. He had sneaked into the bushes and doubled back. He headed off at a fast pace, only stopping occasionally to tie knots in reeds and grasses stretching across the dangerous path. The ties would make other travellers fear that this was a pathway of the little people and would make them turn back before they hit the water. Meanwhile, the bog had heard the talk and seen the approaching warty prey. The dark waters crept back up to greet Scurum as he slowly muttered, "Oh, Scurum gave that boy too much information about your work, Carmen, darling. Is he sure the person he gave it to is in harmony with the harsh, evil force of life?" "No, Scurum is not sure. Could the person with the information in his running away head now be a dangerous, naive believer in good?" "Yeah, Scurum is sure." The water was lapping at his heels when he decided he would cut the head that contained the information off from the legs that might carry it away and spread it around. As he tried to step back from the water with his dagger drawn and his mouth open wide, sniffing the air for Matha, one of his pointy feet sunk deep and he fell over, losing most of his hazel twigs. He got up, but every step was very hard for him, and he bleated magic spells so loud that Matha could hear him from miles further on. Scurum's battle to avoid being enveloped by the swamp took him long enough that fleet-footed Matha was able to put a safe distance between them, and Matha took a few detours, just in case. He knew where he was headed. He was back on a pathway to Tara again. What else was there to do? Before he was halfway there, Matha encountered yet another peculiar spectacle. A delicate chariot that he hadn't seen or heard approaching him was almost on him. When it stopped, it wasn't like anything he'd ever seen. The steed was a smallish brown nanny goat. The coach was only up to his waist. He wouldn't have been able to say whether the lady holding the grass rope reins was of the big people or the little too tiny for one and too tall for the other. When she stood out of her chariot, she held her short, slender figure with great poise, like she was of nobility. Her hair was greying, and round her shoulders was draped a fur stole, the tail of which almost reached the ground. She looked up at Matha and, without introductions or formality, said, "And where it is you're headed for, son?" Considering that she looked honest, if rather highly strung, Matha saw no reason not to tell her. "Micheál will not be got in Tara," she said. She waved her thin arm. "He may be got back in his home place, in the mountainy ground over by the eastern sea." She gave Matha detailed instructions of the way, on condition that he not share his information with any other being. Matha thanked the woman and changed his direction. Within a day and night of constant travel, he had made his way through icy high passes and stony hollows, reaching the Micheál clan's home grounds. When he arrived at the bottom of the hill, still following the directions of the woman, he was stopped by two men with their spears directed at his soft stomach. "Who are you?" "I need to talk to Fionn Micheál," said Matha. "How did you know to come here?" "I was given directions." They didn't believe him about a woman on the pathway giving him directions, nor did their commander when they took Matha for questioning. Eventually, Matha persuaded them that he had an important message, and they led him up the hill till he came to the ditch. In the dusk, the camp behind the ditch looked very ordinary. Inside, he found there were many cabins. As well as the normal things in a farmstead, there were soldiers moving about. A strong-looking woman was outside feeding geese, and she came over to greet him. She introduced herself as Una and took him out the back, where there was yet another enclosed area. Micheál was standing with some of his clan round a large fire. Red-hot stones were being rolled from the fire into a pit of water in which the remains of an old ram was slowly boiling. Micheál looked like he was very contented, enjoying the good attentions of his neighbours and the sounds of his own grandchildren, running around with all the other grandchildren entertaining themselves, excited at the prospect of a feast, dancing, yarns, singing, and merriment stretching far into the long night ahead. The older children had apples, strung from the branches of an ash tree, preparing for the Samhain contests. When he saw Matha, he came over, and when Matha told him the story about the woman with the goat-drawn chariot, he didn't dismiss it like the others had done. He didn't confirm it either. He just laughed and said, "Come on over here and fill yourself with food and drink before you start telling me the business that brought you here so urgently." After he had eaten a little, Matha started with the tale of the peculiar man and his talk of getting hags back working. "Once again, son," said Micheál, "you seem to have a peculiar knack of bringing me the missing piece of a puzzle that has been starting to form in my mind." Micheál explained to Matha that he had been hearing stories of dark doings and curses being enacted on harmless people up in the northwest. Now, that made sense. He expressed his apologies to all present, but said he would have to leave immediately, as every night he delayed in the comforts of his home would mean a few more people would be deprived of the same comforts by the actions of these reinvigorated brokers of bad luck. He insisted that Matha stay and rest, as he had been travelling so long. But Matha had become more interested in seeing this magical drama conclude than in resting his bones. Besides, he was now sure he knew how to use the bowl. The ogre had called it the blood bowl. If spit was the wrong fluid, then blood was surely the right one. So this would be his last chance to travel with Micheál and his friends before he headed home to fix his horse and to rest for the remainder of his days in his own comfortable little valley. He overheard Micheál complaining to his wife as he gathered his things inside in their home. "That's grand to them all," he was saying to her. "Why can't a man ever be left in peace?" Don't be talking raw mash to me, said Una. Grumpy though you are with being asked, there would be no living with you if Conan and the others went on a mission without you. It would be like living with a caged wolf. Go on with yourself now, and be careful of those women. Micheál hardly noticed what she was saying. Not because he didn't respect her views, but because his head was full of thoughts about how to tackle the situation. He was gone within a minute, off to call Conan from some nearby mountain top. Matha was running behind him. Micheál sat talking with Conan that evening. To tell the truth, he said, it is Agnes I'm a bit worried about. Whatever damage the others may do will seem little compared to what will happen if she gets a visit from this little ogre. A bit worried, said Conan sarcastically. Isn't it late that some of us come to our senses? Matha had heard the name Agnes before. All was spoken with hushed fear or by parents threatening calamity on disobedient children. He had thought she was not real. He looked at them for an explanation. Ultimately, Conan glanced at Micheál and said, she's the one that definitely should have been killed according to the king's instructions. She should not have been let stay on in this world. Everyone with a sound head knew that. Killing her would have compounded the wrongs done to her, said Micheál defensively. And what about the wrongs she does while she continues to breathe? Asked Conan. Then he turned back to Matha. You see, she was not like others who were driven merely by a pleasure in doing bad turns. She is driven by a deeper force, a great pool of love that turned sour and curdled into bottomless hatred and vengeance. That makes her always dangerous. She has no self-interest and no care for her own health, so she's immune to threats and flattery. And she might not have turned that way if our boys had behaved themselves. Micheál just looked into the black distance. Conan waved his hand dismissively, saying, let Micheál give you the romantic explanation. It's only the truth, Conan, Micheál said. It does us no good to shy away from it. He explained to Matha. As a young woman, Agnes had been remarked on by everyone in her area for her astounding beauty and her warm nature. She was open and kind, choosing to see only the good in everyone. Unfortunately, she fell in love with a man, Skehan, who spent a short time with the Fianna. He was a lazy man, not much good for anything but sweet talk and deception. He was sent to lead a group of other useless men as coastal lookouts. He wasn't even any good at that. But he boasted of famous battles fought and great acts of heroism. He showered Agnes with attention and told her that she was his first love, that he would die for her. Agnes, in her goodness, opened her heart to him. In truth, of course, Skehan loved only one person. When his wife threatened to stop feeding that person, himself, he turned away from Agnes. He stopped visiting her at their secret meeting place. She couldn't understand it. At first she was terrified that he'd been killed in some glorious battle. But when she heard that he was still hale and hearty, she was sure there must be some other noble explanation. She came to his camp one night, still certain that he would be able to explain everything. She fancied that maybe he was sacrificing their love to spare her from some curse. She didn't even get a chance to put her innocent questions to him. At first sight of her, Skehan panicked because his wife was not far. He whispered fiercely, "Didn't I tell you, girl, never to come to my home?" She pleaded with him, "I just wanted to tell you that I will endure any hardship to be with you." Skehan started shouting at his men to chase her away, saying she was a mad woman. They were confused, so he told them that Agnes was part she, and that she had come to bring misfortune. The men under him were all young and ill-disciplined. They came at her and she ran. She got excited at the chase. They brought hunting dogs with them, and they followed the poor crying girl through the woods like she was a buck or a honk. As the morning broke, the dogs were almost on her. She was exhausted. She gave one last desperate leap, and was even more amazed than the hooligans to find she didn't come down. She could fly. What Skehan had said was true, even though neither he nor Agnes knew it. Agnes's grandmother was of the she. She rested high in an oak tree as the dogs, upset at a breach of nature, whimpered and their owners retreated, not thinking it was all so funny anymore. It was there, in that tree, that Agnes's broken heart began to fester. In her pain, she began to admit thoughts about the world that were not kind ones. She was a clever girl, and she didn't act rashly. She began to plan and measure out her new life. She nursed and nourished her grievances carefully, as if it was a newborn baby. At first, no doubt, her only obsession was with getting revenge on those who had treated her so badly. She wasn't heard of again for a while, as her plan included a lot of learning about all her powers and how to develop them. Only a part of that was the time spent under Carmen's guidance. She learned elsewhere too, from people whose names are best not said. When she was ready, she went to wait in the trees outside Skehan's camp. She waited 3 days until she saw him come out alone. She approached him, dressed in the plain white tunic she had worn when she first met him, her new black shawl thrown aside for the minute. She walked onto the path ahead of him and said, "I'm an honest poor girl looking for the love and protection of a great warrior." Skehan was so greedy that he didn't even hesitate. He came out and put his arm round her shoulder, saying he was the man she sought, and that he felt she might have been sent by the gods, as he was in search of true love. She offered him a kiss, and in the shadows he still didn't recognize her, even as their faces came close. Then, as his lips touched hers, and he saw the hurt that was hardened into her eyes, he cried out, finally realizing. She laughed. He became enraged and called his men again. They didn't come. His bones were changing shape, and he was in a state of agony that was more true and pure than anything in his life. After an eternity of pain, he was a young boar. When he fully understood, he turned and ran back to his camp. She followed him, and there she found his men. Skehan ran from one to the other, squealing and squealing, trying to tell them what had happened. Eventually his wife came out of her cabin to see what the commotion was. Agnes told them innocently that when she saw the young boar, she ran him into their camp, thinking that good people like him might appreciate a meal. They didn't need further advice. The soldiers began trying to catch the wriggly animal, but wanting the biggest share, Skehan's wife was quickest. She grabbed the nearest tool she could find, a sickle. She brought it down again and again on the neck and head of her husband. Agnes, still not recognized by anyone else there, told them that since she had run the pig into their camp, she was entitled to share the meal. They didn't agree. They were so busy skinning the pig and preparing the fire that they didn't stop to think how strange it was that the visitor they had just insulted so cruelly with their refusal of hospitality had then asked politely to stay merely for the pleasure of watching the meat. Not an hour later, with Skehan not even properly cooked, she stood watching the impatient hooligans and the wife savaging the meat from his bones. As they finished, Agnes started laughing, and her laugh grew louder and louder until it pierced an ear and an eye on one side of each of their heads. She told them who she was, and watched them also turn into fat little pigs who wouldn't survive a winter in the woodlands, hunted by hungry farmers. The only one of their company that she spared was the youngest soldier, whom she left with a bleeding ear and a bleeding eye. She ordered him to tell what had happened that day to everyone he met, and to spread the name of Agnes. When she was called to court in Tara a few months later, she didn't deny everything. She confirmed most of the details reported by the boy with the eye and ear permanently leaking. She put on her most innocent face and said to Cormac, "Your Greatness, I was shocked to see my beloved turn into a pig." "How do you explain it?" asked the king, his heart already melting in her eyes. "I am a simple girl, sir. I wouldn't know. Maybe he was a hog all along and merely changed back to his natural form." The king spoke for everyone present when he pronounced, "Even by the word of the witness, this poor girl didn't kill anybody. She didn't eat a single bite of anyone. And we don't even know for sure that the injuries to yon very stupid boy were not caused, as she says, by himself poking his own ear and eye. She is free to go, and more luck to her." Feeling a lot of sympathy for Agnes by now, Matha said, "Well, I can see that what she did wasn't so good, and how would that make you call her the worst Bondry there ever was?" "What?" says Conan. "Do you think I'd begrudge the hungry families that fed on Mrs. Scan and the hooligans? Not at all. They and their leaky lad got their fair rewards. The difficulty was only that the nice woman didn't leave it at that. Her hatred was so deeply planted that she was not able to root it out, if indeed she even tried. By the time she was caught again years later, she had done a great deal of harm to people who had never done her any at all. Only some of it was even known about. One of her favourite pastimes was to linger by the banks of the Barra River and appear on the nearby pathways at dusk. Through the years she had preserved, or maybe even improved, her look of youthful innocence and beauty. She would step out in front of people passing, calling softly for them to come to help her. Men and women alike were mesmerized by her plain face and kind, sad voice, and walked straight into the deep river after her, their eyes and ears bursting from her laughter as they splashed and drew their last air. And that was only the beginning of her saga of destruction, which is best kept for another time. It would be enough to say that her toes curled upwards, and her fingers curled outwards with the toxicity of her thoughts. She turned the majestic yew tree poisonous. Her bitterness even contaminated the lovely sweet damson of the blackthorn and turned it into the bitter sloe. Still, even when all that became known, our big friend here wouldn't carry out the orders of Cormac. Micheál said nothing. "He won't even admit the mistake to this day," said Conan, laughing. "Not even after she spat in his face, instead of thanking him for sparing her life." Matha had a cold feeling at the thoughts of the things that could happen in the country if this Agnes lady got new potions and a dare from Carmen. She would need little encouragement. And he was worried that Conan and Micheál were so caught up in their old disagreement with Agnes that they were not thinking straight about how to deal with her now. "I don't know the woman at all, of course, but I was just thinking," said Matha, nervous at making any suggestion in the company of these two battle-hardened giants. Do you suppose it might help if we got to her before Scurrum does? Just maybe to give her a false impression of the business that Scurrum is about. Do you know now, said Micheál, that's not the worst suggestion I ever heard. Micheál sent a messenger to King Luan of the Little People, asking for 10 of his best warriors. He knew Luan would take no persuading of this. He didn't like big people dabbling in spells and curses. He didn't care whether they were beautiful, ugly, vicious or simple-minded. He didn't care whether they called themselves Bondree, Cailleach, Wizard or Druid. It was all the same to him. It was a very sore point to him that magic was one of the few things that had been left to his people when they had lost their lands long ago. He believed that big people had as little art for magic as they had for dance, and when they meddled in it, the results were always awkward and disruptive. He was more than happy to send 10 hardy little fellas when he heard that the job at hand was to trim the wings of Carmen, whom he held in great contempt for her pretensions to being the most powerful woman in the world. While in his view, even his own 5-year-old daughter could tie Carmen in knots. Should the truce between the peoples ever be broken, that is. The 10 men appeared almost instantly. The task Micheál set them was to go straight back to their home ground in the northwest and trap Vera. The ferrymen found Vera within an hour. Sure enough, they found her walking in left-hand circles round a holy stone and calling a curse into a bowl of wormy food she planned to feed to neighbour sheep. She knew nothing till she was whooshing through the air and landing very uncomfortably in a clump of furze. She was then transported in this cushion of thorns, and the ferrymen left her and the uprooted bush in the desolate Midlands hillside where Micheál stood with Conan and Matha. Before any accusations were laid, she was pleading for her life and begging not to be turned into a nettle. Bless us all, I only broke our agreement a little bit. And doesn't any old one deserve a third chance, she kept saying. Have a bit of decency there, you young Micheál. I knew your aunt well. She was more than happy to do another deal with Micheál. Her task was to fly to Agnes's dwelling in the harsh, rocky lands of Yle and to give her a message. To be sure that Vera did not forget her task, one of the little men of the Tuatha was sent with her, riding in the hem of her cloak and sticking a needle in her arse every now and then to remind her that he was still with her. Vera performed well. When Agnes heard the shuffling of Vera's approach, she came out of her hovel, speaking in her sweetest tones. Who is there? Who has come to visit a soft, simple girl like me? Ease up on the sugar there, darling, said Vera. It's only me. Even though Agnes hadn't seen a fellow Bondree for years, and even though Vera was as close as she had to a friend, there was little warmth in her welcome. She shouted, Did I not tell you before? I don't want you close to me in case your ugliness rubs off. I hope you're not expecting tea, you horrific old Cailleach. I don't have any, and even if I did, I wouldn't give you any. Don't trouble yourself, Princess, responded Vera, who admittedly was not very kind in the eye. I wouldn't dare drink anything that came out of one of your pots. Or food either, because I didn't invite you and what I have is my own. Don't worry about that, said Vera. Your poxy food will have me vomiting for the next 10 years. Well, if you haven't come to beg my drink and food from me, what is it that you want? I'm getting tired of the sight of you already. Never fear, I won't stay a second longer than it takes to deliver you this message. Though since you're being so vile, I'm not sure I should even bother to tell you. Tell me what? Tell you that there's a vagabond wandering the countryside, raiding the humble homes of Bondrees, trying to steal potions and lotions. Oh, there is there? And what does this particular vagabond look like? Vera described Scurrim with the enormous woolen cap like a bucket on the top of his head, and she described his tramping outfit in entirely unnecessary detail. She proceeded to tell Agnes, whose pale and beautiful face was reddening, that she'd heard he was heading in her direction. After delivering the message, Vera departed the house without thanks or farewell. As she was halfway across the bog, Agnes muttered after her, "Yet I suppose you can have half a mug of sloe juice, you miserable old bat, if you really want it." Vera stopped on a treetop to say an unpleasant prayer, after which she lifted her purple tunic to reveal her bony bottom for a moment before speeding away. The trap was perfectly set. As Conan had guessed, Agnes had not given up her craft entirely. She still had plenty of concoctions gathered round her in her hovel. She spent the days and weeks while she waited for the big-headed visitor, preparing the most obnoxious potion she could muster. Scurrim had been staying off the pathways for a while. He was still worried that he had said too much to Matha. He was waiting to see whether the information could be converted into an attempt to capture him. After a few days had passed without any sign of soldiers scouring the area, he assumed he had been wrong. He assumed that Matha had either not heard what he had said or was on the bitter side after all. He got back to business. As it happened, Agnes was his next target. He was looking forward to this, as Carmen had so often spoken of Agnes, mostly with admiration and sometimes even with fear. Agnes had been her best student. Agnes could mesmerize with her beauty alone. Agnes was most silent, taking everything in. Agnes was fired by unfathomable pools of hatred. Agnes wanted everything Carmen could teach her, and even that wasn't enough. Agnes was generally the most dangerous person Carmen had ever met. Agnes this and Agnes that. On rare occasions, when she had had too much elder juice, Carmen had admitted to Scurrim that she knew Agnes was probably already a better witch than herself. Scurrim had tried to picture this beauty. Now he was licking his chins at the idea of finally meeting her. As he was getting closer to Ella, he was even thinking to himself that if Agnes did seem better than Carmen, why, he might very well take up with her and leave Carmen. Why would he want to return to the weaker woman, after all? He spent 2 nights scrounging for information about where exactly Agnes lived. As he picked his way across the dense firs and hawthorns that blocked every approach to her hovel, he was grinning inwardly. He was sure Agnes was going to show him boundless gratitude for bringing her the potions and setting her free from the constraints. But Scurrim had no idea what was in store for him. Agnes hadn't slept a wink since Vera's visit. Before, she always had one eye looking out for a little slit of her window in her hovel. Now she had 2. When Scurrim was still 40 paces from Agnes's place, a flash of light came out of her window, bolted straight at him, and lifted him high off the ground. He was suspended there for several minutes as he slowly transformed from Carmen's ugly husband into a donkey, and then a pea, and finally a large eel that plopped into the swamp and probably swam away. The distant onlookers were pleased with this outcome. Conan still urged Micheál to act now against Agnes. Micheál still ignored him and took him and Matha away from the area. As it happened, there was no need for Conan's worries. Carmen received word from a concerned raven that Agnes had disposed of her big-headed husband. Carmen instantly forgot how bored she had become with Scurrim, or that she had not been too upset at the idea of Micheál cutting him down. Her pride was inflamed at the idea of Agnes taking her man. Her old admiration of Agnes was completely outweighed by her fury at her now. she dedicated her life to vengeance. She would bring Agnes to a sloppy end. She threw caution aside and returned to Ireland. She flew straight to Agnes's den, ready to kill her outright in a sneak attack. But as she gazed through the crack wall, she hesitated for a moment to admire for one last time the beauty of Agnes. Instead of striking at Agnes's heart while she had that chance, she struck her face with a horrible curse, inflicting a deep wound from eyebrow to chin. Agnes cried out so piercingly that Carmen fled in fright. Agnes was not pleased at Carmen's handiwork. She became as obsessed with Carmen as Carmen was with her. And so they remained, pitting all their worst formulations against each other, and so removing the need for Micheál to deal further with either. They can still be seen on moonlit nights, flitting through trees or peering out between legs of dolmens. Once again, Matha was thanked by Micheál. Once again, he refused the appeals of Conan and Micheál to feast and travel with them for a while. He was too anxious to get back home with the bowl to fix everything that he had left in such a poor state.